Welcome to the Veteran Entrepreneur Masterclass with Brett Henderson, founder of Strategic Wealth Endeavor. We've created a community of veteran entrepreneurs just like you who are ready to help you succeed. Our podcast provides expert advice and resources so you can overcome any obstacle in your way. With the help of Brett and veteran guest experts, you can build a battle-ready business mindset to take your company to the next level. Thank you for listening to the Veteran Entrepreneur Masterclass. Now, on to the show.
Dogs can be a veteran's best friend. In fact, the right dog can be a lifesaver. Brett Henderson's guest knows this from firsthand experience. Kenny Bass is the executive director and co-founder of the Battle Buddy Foundation, a nonprofit with a combined mission. The organization helps veterans get service dogs and provides a network of peer support and activity. It also promotes education and awareness of post-traumatic stress disorder, traumatic brain injury, the veteran suicide epidemic, and the life-saving benefits of highly trained service dogs. Brett, how did you meet Kenny in the first place?
It's an interesting question, Patrice. Good morning. Good to hear you. And Kenny, good to see you, brother. I guess
Awesome.
no one can see that we can see, but that's probably a good thing, right? But good to be here. How did I meet you? So in March of 2018, I had a good friend, Lieutenant Colonel Adam Collier. He and I were the same age. He was an academy guy. I was an ROTC guy. And we met through actually one of my neighbors said, yeah, you need to meet this guy. And I met him socially. He was a Marine reservist. Daytime job was a DEA agent for LA. And so on the weekends, we had time off. We would just get together and kind of reminisce a little bit. And it was interesting for me because I'm not a combat veteran. I was a peacetime Marine. And I just wanted to see, or as I spent time with him, just catching up, for me, it was interesting to hear someone who had been in for 20 years and stayed in and where they were and where the Corps was going and what they were doing. And for me, it's just one of those guilt things where, because I am a peacetime Marine and majority of my friends who stayed in all went to combat and went to Iraq, went to Afghanistan. And it's one of those things where you practice for a game as an analogy, but you never play the game. And you always wonder how you would have done. And so when I would sit with him and chat, it's just one of those ways for me to connect with something that I never did and always kind of wondering how I would have done. So it's one of those things, just imagine practicing for a game your whole life and never playing. And that's how I felt and still feel. And I actually have dreams. I have dreams all the time still that I'm back in the Marines. I'm on a tank again. And like, we have a mission to go do. And I haven't been in for 20 years. And I'm like, guys, I'm a little rusty. Give me some time, but I'm ready to go. Just give me a little bit to figure out which way's up again. So I have that dream all the time. And I think it's because I didn't go to combat and all my friends did. So again, your question, was how did you meet Kenny? Well, unfortunately, one night I was having dinner with my friend, Adam Collier, and you could tell something was off. You could tell he wasn't in a good space. I'm like, what's going on, man? He's like, I don't know. What do you mean? I'm just trying to figure out what's next. So his command tour was ending for 4th Recon, and he wasn't sure what to do next. And you could tell he was a little lost. You could tell he didn't have a sense of purpose. He wasn't married, didn't have kids, didn't have a dog, didn't have a cat, didn't have anything, and just kind of running around and didn't have a purpose. He's like, yeah, I'm going to go back to Afghanistan just to do something. And if you think about what that means, like if you just want to go to Afghanistan just to do something like that, it kind of shares where your mindset is. I said, okay, man, if you need anything, I'm here. I want to talk about anything else. He's like, yeah, I appreciate it. And that following Saturday, he went to the same bar, sat with the same bartender, said he was excited about some stuff he was doing, and then went to Vons, went grocery shopping, went home, put half his groceries away, took out his will, took out his pistol, and shot himself. And we lost him that night. And it crushed me. So you hear of the 22 a day, and you hear we're losing all these veterans, and it's a sad thing. So, but that's just a number, it's just a picture, it's a statistic, it's not personal. However, when one of your best friends that you were just having dinner with is no longer there and will never be there again the rest of your life, that's different. It becomes personal. It's no longer a statistic. It's personal. And that was a catalyst for me to want to do something to start to give back to the community or get involved again. Because I was in the Marine Corps 1998 through 2002. So literally it's been 20 years. I can't believe it's been 20 years, but 20 years. And for me at that time, the Marine Corps was just a part of my life. It had been my life a little bit, but 20 years you're moving on, or at that time, 16 years moving on. It's a piece of your life, but it's not who I am in and out. It's not everything I am. So, but that re-engaged me. That said, I want to get back. I want to start being involved again. I want to start doing more. I want to give back. I want to see if I can help these guys so it doesn't happen to someone else. And I just started racking my brain about how I can help and started looking for organizations and ways to give back. And I chat with a friend at the time, and someone said, I wonder if you would have had a dog, something just to care for. And it made me think about the situation and who he was and what he had. I'm sure he was a good guy, caring guy. And if he would have had someone to focus his attention on, his energy on, I feel he may still be here today. So I literally found Kenny on a Google search for service dogs, and then found he was a Marine. I'm like, boom, let's chat. So I reached out to him, and then he'll tell more about the organization, but he lives in Ohio. How are things in Ohio this morning, Kenny?
Not bad. Warm and sunny. So I can't complain.
Nice. Well, it's not warm and sunny here. It's warm and cloudy, but that's okay. It's a marine layer here in Los Angeles. But so he has a partner that helps out who's in California. So, you're close. So even though he's in Ohio, he comes out to California a couple times a year, which I'll let Kenny talk about that. So we started chatting, I think, in 2018. It's been 3-4 years. And right after that happened. And so I started making donations, but I said, what is a way to really give back besides just asking for money? And that's something we'll come back to later on. So that's how I met Kenny. And so Kenny, when you and I had dinner that first night with our two partners, why don't we chat about what we talked about there and how we connected, and why don't you take the ball and go from there, brother?
Well, see, you made your first mistake as far as brain injury guys go, asking me to do the remembering and retell the story there. So you might have to. I do remember
it was the best dinner ever of your life.
I thought so. that makes sense. That sounds about right. I do remember coming to the office, and us hanging out, and it's one of those things where Marines, 99% of the time, I meet a Marine and I already love them. They've almost got to do something to make me not like them when I find out they're a Marine. It's just kind of one of those things, fast friends pretty quick there. But, obviously, getting a chance to talk to you, I'm sure we talked that night and you had told me your story. And, it's sad to know how common that story is, on multiple fronts. On the front, where you were talking about, spending time with your friend, connecting with him. And the next thing you know, out of nowhere, they end up becoming a statistic. They end up taking their own life. Even beyond that, one of the things you touched on that hit home is you were talking about, being on the team, but never getting to play the game. I knew a lot of Marines that felt that way, especially if they were training, and then get out before the war kicked off. We actually had a Marine who was in our battalion. I believe he was a Master Sergeant McGurry. We went to his retirement ceremony just a couple of weeks before, the whole battalion out there, just a couple of weeks before they announced that we were going to Iraq. And he basically pulled every string he had, created while he was in the Marine Corps to get back in and to get back into our unit, because during his 20-some years, he had never been to combat. Right. He'd either been training or doing other billets, right, when it was time to go. So for him, he couldn't wait to, anything he could do to get back and go over and serve with us. But you're right. I can remember telling people I felt very lucky because I was in the Marine Corps for a total of 4 years. When Iraq happened, I had been in for just over 2 years. And so the way the Marine Corps works, you basically have these 2-year cycles, where it's a good year or so of training and, getting ready to go and getting kind of the okay to go overseas. Like you've met all your requirements and then you get to go overseas. So I got to do like a full training cycle, and then Iraq kicked off. So I was kind of right in my prime as a young Marine to get to go, overseas. I felt lucky. I felt like a sophomore getting to play, the big game day kind of thing. So I remember feeling very lucky. And I remember, just knowing that there's a lot of other Marines that, the same thing, if they, for some reason they missed out on that wartime, but it's also funny because looking back, I had no idea what I was asking for.
Yeah, right.
I had no idea what, I was in for or, what we were going into. But, of course I wouldn't change it even now if I had the opportunity. But either way, back to where we had met, and kind of how that happened. What do you say? I remember we came down when we met with you at your office. I think we went out to dinner.
Yeah, we had dinner, and we talked about Sergeant Major and a couple of your events that were going on, and you told me your story. So why don't you shift and share your story and what was the catalyst to everything and how we got where we are today and how you found. Well, I won't drop any names, but I'm sure you're going to say the name here in a minute. But why don't you just kind of walk through your experience and how we got to where we are today?
Yeah, well, so like I mentioned, I was an active duty Marine from 2000, 2004, infantry Marine. I was in for the 2 years before Iraq kicked off. And then January, we floated over on ship to be there for the invasion. About 6 months into the war, we were doing these things called counter ambush patrols. Essentially, they had a lot of enemy combatants that would look for soft targets. So Red Cross, civilian construction workers coming in to kind of try and rebuild the infrastructure. And they would hit them and, ambush them, kill them, capture them, whatever they could do. So for a couple of months or, a while, our job was to go out, kind of patrol slowly and give them a target. And then, if they attacked, then, of course, our job was to either, hit them with overwhelming firepower, either kill or capture. So basically, we were out doing those and they knew we were coming. So they set up 105 millimeter tank rounds or artillery rounds, which is 5 of those guys right there behind me. And they wired it to a battery. They daisy chained together, wired it to a battery off the road. And wait till we drove past. And right about the time my right front tire was next to it, they set it off. Luckily for me, it was early in the war. And they weren't very good at creating IEDs yet. They didn't have very much experience. So I think only 2 or 3 of them went off. So the blast wasn't as big as it could have been. Obviously, I've still got all my hands and all my limbs and arms and stuff. So I'm pretty lucky compared to a lot of the guys and gals that experienced a similar situation over there. But it was kind of that blast wave, as it passes through your body, it can create some pretty damaging long-term effects. So
Sure.
The brain injury and all that stuff, post-traumatic stress. Obviously, the post-traumatic stress isn't necessarily from the blast itself, as opposed to the combined time there in Iraq. But yeah, so I stayed in country. I didn't have any major wounds. I just had some small shrapnel and stuff in the face and the blast wave, like I said. But, it was, back then they didn't understand IEDs the same as they do now. So, had it been more recent, we'd have been in a dark room, kind of resting the brain for a few weeks or whatever it was. But, back then we, like I said, I wasn't missing any limbs. I wasn't injured too bad outwardly. So, we were back out doing counter ambush patrols the next day, finished out the deployment, came home. So here we are back stateside now. And, I was in an infantry platoon and it always kind of makes me laugh now. But at one point I had a few of my infantry Marines look at me and they were like, Kenny, something's wrong with you, buddy. You might want to go see a counselor, and to have a big group of crazy infantry Marines look at you and tell you you're crazy, there's really got to be something going on. But, so I started seeing a counselor while I was an active duty Marine for PTSD. I was having severe anxiety. Here I was, this Marine Corps combat veteran walking around with a combat action ribbon on my chest. Not many Marines in late 2003, early 2004, not many people on base had seen combat. So,
right.
I should have felt 10 foot tall and bulletproof when really I felt like a 4th grader at times, walking down to the office with just knots in my stomach, knowing I was going to get in trouble when I had nothing to be afraid of. Like I couldn't explain the anxiety. I mean, it was crippling. But needless to say, while I was still active duty, they sent me over to start being seen. I was in, like I said, for nearly another year before I got out. So it's a story I've told, but it's not one I've told a whole lot. But there was a little bit of time there from when I got back from Iraq and was still an active duty Marine before I was off active service and getting out. So around that time, they were doing stop loss. They were stop loss at a lot of the Marines that were supposed to get out. Joshua Rivers, my co-founder, was originally supposed to get out, I believe, in July of 2003, and they ended up stop lossing him till, I think for another 6 months before he was actually able to get out. So when we returned in September of 2003, most of my unit turned around and started retraining to go back. 1st Battalion, 4th Marines actually went back, and they were a big part of Fallujah in early 04, which anybody that followed the war, that was a pretty big piece. For me, for guys that weren't going to be in long enough to complete another deployment with them, I actually got sent to a casualty replenishment company. So what they do there is if you've got units that are getting chewed up really bad and losing a lot of guys that are not combat effective anymore, they've got to replace those numbers. So as opposed to, say, Johnny, getting wounded, injured, or killed and not being there, and Kenny going in to take that spot, and everybody kind of looking at me like, you're not Johnny, like you can't replace our buddy kind of thing. They match you with a battle buddy that you train with stateside, and then they send you over to that unit together. So you're in pairs. So it's not just you by yourself. So in the casualty replenishment company, I had my buddy that I was matched with. He was similar to you. He had been deployed before, but he was out in the middle of the desert, kind of guarding some fence or something like that. Nothing.
Fence
and
patrol.
So his first patrol or his first deployment, he very much felt like I didn't get to do my part. Couldn't wait to get back. Me, on the other hand, I was in a space where I wasn't so sure. I'd gotten blown up. I'd been through, a fair portion while we were there that first 8 months. But my main concern was, after being, blown up, like how injured was I? How bad was this PTSD stuff? I really didn't understand yet. I didn't want to go over and be a burden. I didn't want to go over and be the weak link. So there was part of me that was a little scared there. Not scared, but nervous,
Apprehensive. Yeah.
Right. Now, it didn't matter much because I didn't have a choice. I was stop lost. I was going to go anyway. So I think we trained 3 or 4 months, getting ready to go. And about 2 weeks before we were set to go, they came and they changed the stop loss date. I no longer had to go. I missed it by a couple of days. So at first I didn't say, my buddy, I think didn't have to go either. But like I said, he couldn't wait to get back. He was, dying to go over and basically do his part. But like I said, for me, I wasn't so sure. I spent the first few days, and I was married. I didn't tell my wife. I didn't tell my family anything. I thought maybe I'll just go ahead, and not tell anybody and go ahead and go back with my buddy. But I want to say after about 3 or 4 days, I ended up deciding, I was just going to go ahead and EAS and get out. I didn't want to take that chance of maybe not making it the second time.
Right.
But
that's fair.
So I'll leave it there, but we'll come back to that. So I ended up getting out of the Marine Corps. There was some few other things in there, but just for the sake of time, you fast forward about a year or so. Instead of getting into the VA, I got into the bottom of a bottle. I drank a lot. I was in the bar all the time. Obviously, from being in Iraq, you're never arm's length away from your weapon. Literally, I slept with my rifle pointed downwards towards my feet, but instead of having like a pillow or a blanket between my knees, it was my rifle barrel. And that's how I slept constantly. It was always there. So a year later, now I'm out of the Marine Corps. I'm drinking all the time. I'm not doing real well with, my issues. And I wasn't unarmed. I kept a gun, a pistol with me all the time. So, of course, one night here I am leaving the bar at 2:30 in the morning. I drank way too much, pistol on my lap for some unforeseen reason. I understood it then. I don't understand it now.
Right.
Looking back, I'm like, what kind of space was I in to think that was a good idea? But
right.
I ended up getting pulled over. I ended up getting a DUI. I ended up catching 2 felonies for the gun. One for having one chambered, condition 1, and the other one for just carrying concealed weapon without the proper licensing. And so that becomes an ordeal. They throw me in jail. I'm looking at minimum mandatory 5 years on each felony charge. So if the judge wants to take it really easy on me, I'm looking at 10 years. And they throw me in county jail with, everybody else that belongs in county jail.
Yep.
And I end up spending a couple months kind of, in jail dealing with that. Ultimately, after like this year or two process, they end up dropping them to misdemeanors. They end up giving me non-reporting probation, things like that. I go through the process. It all gets expunged off my record and I'm good in the end. But for me, it was one of those wake-up calls. Here I went from this 10-foot tall combat veteran Marine. I was looking at joining Huntington Beach Police Department when I got out. I actually went a good portion through the selection process. We went from about 300 of us down to about 10 or 11. They were hiring 18. I actually pulled out of the process right before the lie detector test, which is one of the last few steps, partially because of the PTSD, TBI stuff. I was pretty scared. Like, you don't want to be a police officer and go out there and make the wrong decision either. That's a good way to ruin the rest of your life, let alone, anything else. But so needless to say, to go from that and, working on being a law enforcement officer to here I am in county jail in Columbus, Ohio, not knowing what my future holds, was a pretty rude wake up call. And I mean, it's not a space I would wish on anybody, but it was really what I needed.
Right.
I literally got out of jail, and the first thing I did was I went to the VA. I stopped drinking. I started going to counseling. Literally, I was in the VA hospital 3 to 5 times a week. Started taking the medications that they were prescribing, things like that. But essentially that became my full-time job. I started doing that, and that went on for about 8 years or so. And, it kind of became one of those things where, at first I started out Paxil, 10 milligrams of Paxil 3 times a day, right? Not a big deal, small SRI. Maybe that'll help with the brain chemistry, things like that.
Right.
But you fast forward 8 years, and I went from 10 milligrams of Paxil 3 times a day to, at this point, they added 800 milligrams of Seroquel 3 times a day, but that was pills number 30 to 33. So, I went from 3 pills a day to now I'm on 33 pills a day, with all these SRIs and medications to sleep, medications to wake up, things like that. And I can tell you, I may not have had as many of the crazier feelings or severely depressed, feelings I was having, but I wasn't better, if anything, I was flat. I used to tell people I felt like a zombie. So it was one of those where it became obvious that, my quality of life wasn't better. And something needed to change. For me, the Seroquel is kind of what was the tipping point there. Most people I know, just one of those would put, 180 pound guy on his back for a few hours, and I'm maybe 140 soaking wet, on a good day. So 3 of those a day didn't put me in much of a good space. So, I made the decision, hey, we've got to find something better, and over the next couple of years, I started to kind of slowly get off the medications, with the help of my VA doctor. And through that, at one point, he's like, Kenny, what do you think about a service dog? I think a service dog would make a wonderful difference in your life. And I said, hey, I like dogs, and that sounds great to me. A well-trained dog, like I can get on board with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my VA doctor, he wrote me a prescription and, said, good luck. The VA doesn't pay for them. We don't provide them. We don't have any connections. That's on you. So I said, okay. And I did like anybody did. I went home, I got on my computer, I started Google searching, where do I get a service dog? And, basically I spent about a good month or so, going back and forth, trying to get information, and, came to the conclusion that I was looking at anywhere from about $10,000 to $60,000 to get a service dog. And, mind you, at this point, I'm Social Security, minimal disability. I wasn't even at 100% yet, I don't think. Or maybe I had just gotten, to that point, but a wife, 2 kids, she can't work because her full-time job is essentially helping to take care of me and help take care of the kids. So, funding is very minimal. The idea of 10 grand, let alone 60 grand, seems unreachable. And so I nearly give up. I nearly say, okay, I guess this isn't for me. I can't afford a $10,000 dog or a $60,000 dog. That's crazy. But luckily for me, one of my younger brothers was a little more internet savvy than I was. And I think we're talking, this is late 2011 or so.
Okay.
So a lot of those GoFundMe, Indiegogo, a lot of those fundraising websites and stuff weren't very popular yet. There weren't very many people doing that.
Right.
So he had started one of those for me. And I think we raised like $3,500 or so in the first couple of weeks. And for me, it was that, just that alone, the 100 or so people or whatever it was that had no idea who I was. These weren't people that knew me. These were just random people online that are like, hey, this veteran served. He served our country. He needs our help. I got $20 towards that or whatever it was,
Right.
you know? And to be honest, I walked around for a long time with a big chip on my shoulder, you know, and I was struggling through, you know, through my darkness, feeling like nobody cares, you know, like everybody's got their own problems. You know, I'm just another guy, you know, I'm just another vet, you know, like nobody really cares. Like, yeah, they thank me for my service. Yeah, they're maybe grateful overall, but they don't really care about me.
Of course.
And the truth is I was dead wrong. You know, it wasn't that. I mean, there's a lot of people that really do not just care about veterans, but would love a way to help them if they just knew the right way to do it, you know?
Right.
And so that was kind of that beginning phase for me, realizing like people do care about veterans and people even do genuinely care about me and what I had been through. And so, you know, anyway, we raised that $3,500. I found an organization in New York who was founded by a Marine. So I'm like, oh, great. You know, I had read that he had some psychology, sociology background. I'm like, okay, so the guy's going to have some idea about PTSD and stuff like that. And then on top of that, they were using these world-class German Shepherds. And so I'm like, okay, you know, dog's likely going to be healthy. Like, obviously these guys are serious. And so, you know, I continued with the fundraising. I think, you know, like I said, we raised $4,000. I was able to do a down payment and kind of get that going with them. I didn't know that the organization I went with, that Atlas, my service dog, was the first that they had ever placed. And it was one of only two that they would ever place before they closed their doors.
Wow.
I didn't know that it was going to be just, there was a lot of obstacles in there, you know.
I mean, it wasn't easy. Come on.
No.
You know, isn't everything easy? What do you mean?
Yeah. You know, I think the most surprising part to me is you expect nonprofits or people that are in these positions are there because they're the experts, because they know what they're doing, because they've been doing it for a while or something like that. And it was really, really surprising to me to find out that not only through the organization I went through, but many of the organizations that were out there seemed to have almost no clue about the client base, about what it's like to be a combat veteran, what it's like to be a combat veteran with TBI and PTSD and things like that. The kind of requirements they would have, or the kind of stipulations they would have in their service dog contracts, where they're always kind of hanging something over your head. And it's like, you can't do that, you know, to a lot of these guys that, you know, PTSD and TBI. There's many things like that, you know, that really made me realize, like, there's got to be a better way.
Right.
And, you know, I can tell you, you had mentioned Josh, who lives out there in Santa Clarita, Joshua Rivers, my co-founder. You mentioned him earlier, how that came to be. Josh and I were on the phone. I can remember this. I have a terrible, terrible memory, but this I can remember clear as day, because it was kind of that epiphany moment in my life where, you know, everything genuinely changed. And Joshua and I were talking on the phone. You know, I was pacing around my garage like I normally do on phone calls. And he was asking me about, this was when I was still trying to do the fundraising for, you know, my service dog. And he's asking me, he's like, Kenny, so the VA doesn't pay for it? And I'm like, no, the VA doesn't pay for it. And he's like, you know, that's crazy. You know, there should be a better way. And, you know, all this sorts of thing. And, you know, he had made donations and was trying to find people he knew in his network that could help support me and all this. And near the end of the call, we were sitting there and he's like, Kenny, you know, he's like, what do you think about when you're done doing the fundraising for your dog Atlas, continuing what you're doing and helping other veterans, you know? And for me, it was really that moment where I was like, the last 10 years where I had come so close, you know, I can't tell you how many times I'd sat with my own 40 caliber pistol and like your friend, thought the world would be a better place without me. Mm-hmm. You know, I had two, like I mentioned, I had two kids and a wife. You know, I had a lot of reasons, you know, that you would think to fix yourself and, you know, get your life back. And I mean, it still kind of kills me today that wasn't enough. But right. there were many times where I genuinely felt like, instead of being there for my kids, being like you're supposed to be as a father, you know, and as a man in their lives, you know, being supportive and being there for them, I was a burden. You know, I was always so angry, and I was always so just not a good person to be around, I felt like, you know, and there was a lot of times where, like I said, I felt like not just the kids, but the world would be a better place without me. The reality is, I know now that I was dead wrong. You know, I was incredibly wrong. But there's a lot of vets out there that feel that way. You know, there's a lot of vets out there that are struggling to do the exact same things that I was, who think that the world would be a better place without them. And so when Josh asked me, he's like, Kenny, you know, what do you think about doing what you're doing now and helping other veterans? for me, that was that moment where I realized all that struggle, all that dark, deep valley that I was going through was all for a purpose. It wasn't because I was way off track. It wasn't because I was so screwed up and here I am out in the middle of nowhere. I was going through those dark times for a reason. And that reason is so I can help other veterans that are going through the same things that I've been through. And so, when Josh asked me, that was that moment where I'm like, the light bulb clicked on it. Is like, there's value there. And this is what we're going to do. And so that's really where the Battle Buddy Foundation was born. We decided, there needs to be an organization that's founded by veterans to serve veterans, and that's in this doing it for the right reasons. There's a lot of service dog organizations out there.
Right. So Kenny, you're chatting about your organization and the different ones out there that you experienced in your own search for an organization to help you. What are the different types of organizations out there that provide service dogs? Are they big? Are they small? Is it corporate? Is it mom and pop? Give us a lay of the land.
Actually, you hit it on the head. It really is. It's all of those. You get your local trainer that's trained dogs. That decides, hey, I want to go into the service dog world. You get people that their focus is on fosters and rescues, with their main focus is rescue and shelter dogs, things like that. And they're like, hey, we could train them to be service dogs, and they go that route. And you get, your large corporate style organizations that have kennels built for 150 dogs. You really get them kind of across the board. So it was one of those where, realizing that, and obviously, in the beginning of our organization, kind of seeing how different the approach can be,
right?
Realizing that we want to be more of a niche organization. We want to do our best to provide elite service dogs, basically give them the highest level of training that they can have before we match them with veterans. A key portion of that I think a lot of entities, when developing their programs, don't consider is, unlike say a service dog for mobility, right, or a physical disability. That's totally different than if you're talking about a service dog for, say, post-traumatic stress. If you're dealing with a client that's suicidal, that's a whole nother animal than a veteran that's dealing with, or I'm sorry, a client that's dealing with mobility issues. Right. So they're very different approaches. I think we could definitely discuss that a little more in depth.
I agree. So this has been a great session. I've heard your story before, but never at this level of detail. So I was learning as you were sharing. So that's awesome. I want to thank you for that. But I agree. Let's stop here and let's lead off with another podcast with you and I, and we'll really go into the Battle Buddy Foundation, what it is today, who it serves today, the dogs you train today, and the veterans you help today. So I think that would be another session. So if you like this and like Kenny and you're putting up with me, that's fine. Stay tuned. And we're going to have another episode with Kenny and we'll talk about the Battle Buddy Foundation. Patrice. All
right. Now I'm just going to ask you guys a question and then we will go on, but we'll remind people there will be a part 2 to this. How can listeners reach you, Brett? And how can listeners reach you, Kenny? Brett, you're first.
Sure thing. So our website is SWE90.com. That's strategicwealthendeavor.com. And I'm Brett Henderson, and my email is brett at SWE90.com. And direct line 310-491-7045, 310-491-7045.
Kenny, you're up.
Well, I'm Kenny Bass with the Battle Buddy Foundation. I'm pretty easy to find. If you look up Battle Buddy Foundation, it's tbbf.org. Or if you're looking for me, you can just look up kennybass.com. Makes it pretty easy.
All right. And for all you listeners, part 2. Follow this podcast. You will know when part 2 of this episode is ready. And please share with friends and colleagues. I'm Patrice Sikora, and thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you for listening to the Veteran Entrepreneur Masterclass podcast. Don't forget to click the follow button to become notified when new episodes become available. Securities offered through IFP Securities LLC, DBA Independent Financial Partners, IFP, member FINRA, and SIPC. Investment advice offered through IFP Investors LLC, DBA Independent Financial Partners, IFP, a registered investment advisor. IFP and Strategic Wealth Endeavor INC are not affiliated. The views expressed are that of the host and are for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to buy or sell securities. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors. Neither IFP Investors LLC, IFP Securities LLC, DBA Independent Financial Partners, IFP, nor their affiliates offer tax or legal advice. Interested parties are strongly encouraged to seek advice from qualified tax and or legal experts regarding the best options for your particular circumstances. The information given herein is taken from sources that IFP Advisors LLC, DBA Independent Financial Partners.